Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar on rights-based complaints handling. My name is Liz Hefren-Webb and I'm the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commissioner and I'm chairing today's webinar. I would first like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And I extend that respect and acknowledgement to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people watching today. I'm joining today from Ngunnawal country. Joining me on the panel today are Treasure Jennings, the new Aged Care Complaints Commissioner, David Pezzaniti, our Assistant Commissioner for Intake and Complaints, Samantha Edmonds, Director Policy Education and Systemic Advocacy at the Older Persons Advocacy Network, OPAN, and David Wright-Howie, the Senior Policy Officer, Council on the Ageing, or COTA, as many of you know them. Before I start the discussion, I'll do a quick bit of housekeeping. So we'll have our speakers and then we'll move to a Q&A session. You can ask questions at any time. Just use the question box via the live Q&A tab, which should be visible on your screen. We also have a short survey for you to complete at the end of today's webinar to provide us with feedback on the event. Just stay online and a survey will pop up on screen. It's only short and your feedback is important to us, both in determining future topics, but also to understand the value of the topics we're discussing today. And today's webinar will be recorded and published on our website in the next couple of days. We will also be posting the slides. Everyone who registered for today's session will be sent a link to the recording as soon as it's available. So in today's webinar, I'm going to introduce Treasure. Treasure's role is independent and came out of the key recommendations from the Royal Commission. She will share with you a bit about herself, along with her initial observations and priority areas of focus for the year ahead. And we'll talk about rights-based approach to complaints handling and what has changed under the new legislation. We will also discuss best practice complaints handling for providers and what older people expect when they make a complaint. We'll also be hearing from David Pezzaniti from Treasure's team, who will be covering the changes introduced in the Aged Care Act. Then Samantha Edmonds from OPAN and David Wright-Howie from COTA will be talking to us about how their organisations support and advocate for older people receiving aged care. So let's get started, and I'm really pleased now to invite Treasure Jennings to kick off our discussion. Hello, Treasure.
Thank you, Liz, and hello everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm coming from Melbourne, which is the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. So just to sort of start off, I'll share a little bit about myself. Prior to joining the Commission, which was 3 months ago on the 1st of November when the Act came into being, I was a Commissioner for Victoria prior to that with mental health and also disability. Both of those commissions operated a complaints function, and I've been in the complaints space as an ombudsman in consumer-based schemes as well. So my background is really both in consumer and human rights complaints environments. So my experiences in complaints go back a few decades now, and my primary takeaway from those experiences is that often it's poor communication and a lack of person-centred approaches in that really broad sense that is often what drives a person to complain or feel dissatisfied. Therefore, the better communication and individualising of a person's experience is often a way to resolve complaints and, for that matter, to prevent a complaint in the first place. So today I'll speak more broadly and hopefully provide you with some ideas for complaint handling effective and in a rights-based environment. So I'm going to start by it's a bit of a busy slide, but this just gives you an overview of the functions that I have as Complaints Commissioner and also some observations and priorities. As many of you would know, but by way of a reminder, the role of an independent, dedicated Complaints Commissioner came about in response to the Royal Commission into Aged Care, Quality and Safety, fulfilling the government's election promise. So thank you for all of those that thought it was a good idea. I do too. As the Aged Care Complaints Commissioner, I'm responsible for the complaints functions under the Aged Care Act, so that's the new one, 2024, For anyone who wants to know more, you can actually take a look at section 358 of the Act, and these functions deal with complaints and feedback about providers, responsible persons and workers. Broadly speaking, this means I'm responsible for upholding the rights of older people and resolving their complaints or concerns with meaningful restorative outcomes, dealing with complaints and feedback about providers and workers, helping older people and their supporters to make complaints and give feedback, which is also really important, and promoting best practice complaints handling. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit in a moment, but that's to build on a culture of continuous improvement and open disclosure across the aged care sector. So as I said, I'm up to about 100 days in the role, and I've had some initial observations which I'd like to share with you. The first observation is probably that the Commission has seen a pretty significant increase in complaints since the new Act took effect. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. It could, however, mean that people are a bit confused or unsure of some of the changes, and also too, sometimes media attention can prompt people to question their services. However, what we really want is for providers to handle these complaints locally and get it right first time if it's possible to do so. And importantly, for people to feel okay to raise their issues with their provider in the first instance, and for providers to get really good at resolving those complaints. And in the Statement of Rights, which is section 23(9) of the Act, an individual has the right to open communication and support from registered providers when issues arise in the delivery of funded aged care services. They can make a complaint using an accessible mechanism without fear of reprisal. So that's also very important about the delivery of funded aged care services for the individual, and have their complaints dealt with fairly and promptly. So they are the priorities and responsibilities I'm not entirely sure why I just muted, but I'm sorry if anything got missed then. Good processes and practices are the foundation for timely and effective complaint handling that not only fixes the problem for the person, but also identifies broader issues that may impact on others. My priority is to ensure that complaints made to the Commission are providing insights back to providers on systemic issues to support continuous improvement. I'll also be focusing on how best to use the powers in the Act to ensure that significant issues are fixed, and that the provider responds in an appropriate way, and that actions expected by the Commission are undertaken by the provider. As I mentioned, another priority is also to support providers to handle complaints better the first time it is raised, and to help providers set up processes and practices that support local complaint resolution. I'm just going to talk a little bit now about a rights-based approach. So what does a rights-based approach to complaint handling look like? In practice, this means we will involve the older person in all complaints, even if someone else has made the complaint. This ensures we understand the person's wishes, issues and outcomes they seek. The older person, their supporter or advocate, will be involved in all decisions they want to be involved in. So that's a tenet of the way in which the Commission operates. We'll handle the complaint in a way that respects a person's right to privacy, which is obviously very important. We'll ensure we ask the complainant or older person on the method and frequency of contact that they prefer. Most importantly, we'll consider the older person's rights in relation to the complaint issues and reinforce these rights to the provider if need be. We'll seek to understand whether the provider is meeting their obligations. When it's appropriate to do so, we'll work with providers to understand the complaint in the context of the older person's rights, ensure they remedy issues raised, restore relationships, rebuild trust, and prevent any reoccurrence of these issues. We'll contact the complainant older person before closing the complaint to ensure their views on the process were heard and decisions explained. and that they are aware of their right to seek a review. And we'll use the complaints process as an opportunity to educate and empower older people on their rights. And as I mentioned, particularly to educate providers about the statement of rights and their obligations. Complaints are a very powerful tool and that give a voice to older people and their supporters. Complainants give people a chance to share their experiences and concerns about aged care services. They show what is working well, what needs to improve, and what matters most to those using aged care services in Australia. So what I wanted to do now was talk through some of a process that I'm hoping will support providers to work through complaints more effectively. Like I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, I'm really keen to make sure that this is a session that's practical. So what I wanted to introduce now is a method called the 4 A's of complaint handling. And this is a really good method that helps develop a robust framework for complaints, and it works very well in the rights-based approach. I didn't invent this approach. It's been around for many, many years, and it's used by different commissions and ombudsman schemes. But it is a very helpful resolution method, and it can also be used as a bit of a guide for open disclosure conversations as well. So as the name suggests, there are 4 steps, and the first step is acknowledging the complainant and the issues that they are raising. This means accepting that the complainant's experience or issues are legitimate. It's about empowering the person and demonstrating a willingness to listen. In an open disclosure conversation, this would be describing and acknowledging the event. The next step is to answer the question or provide a reasonable explanation, making sure to listen to the complainant to see if these explanations resolve all or some of the issues. The next phase is probably a very important one, which is what actions are you as a provider going to take to rectify the issues? This might be related to the incident or incidents affecting the older person, or it might be something across the particular site or a process or a specific activity that impacts on a number of people. Depending on the issue, if the Commission is involved in the complaint, the Commission may seek from the provider to ensure that these actions are followed through on. However, from a provider perspective, this is also a chance to explain to the older person or their supporter or advocate that what you're going to do to fix the problem. And this is a really important part of rebuilding trust. And the most significant A of all is an apology. You shouldn't fear making an apology. It is a very powerful way to help the person to move on from the issue. And of course, in an open disclosure conversation where something has gone wrong, it's a requirement, and so that would give rise to an apology if you're having one of those conversations. Now, there are a range of variations on this approach that have been developed. However, I recommend this approach for its simplicity and general success. And it is one that I plan to be embedding more explicitly into the Commission's practices as well. However, as I mentioned, supporting providers to improve their complaint handling is one of my priorities. So this is not the only time I will be talking about better practice approaches such as this. And what I will just say before I hand over to David, who's going to talk in a bit more detail, for those of you that are thinking about making a complaint, our details are on the website, which includes a web form that you can use, so you can contact us by email or through web form. But if you do want to make a complaint, the phone number is 1800 951 822. Thank you very much for your time today, and I'll hand over to David, who's going to talk through some specific changes in the Act and how this is going to be brought to life. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Treasure, and welcome again, everyone. I'm coming to you today from the land of the Kaurna people here in the Adelaide Plains. Again, I have a slide here which is a bit busy and might be better as a handout, which we'll be providing to everyone after the event today. It's intended to highlight how the new Act has brought about a range of changes for us all, so older people, providers and the Commission. And while some of these changes are unique, there are some commonalities and intersections, all with a central purpose to ensure the provision of safe, quality care. We thought a Venn diagram might be a good way of showing that, so open to feedback on that one as you've had a chance to review it. So I'm going to take you through what I see as some key changes. And firstly, the key changes for older people are a person-centred, rights-based approach, which means a focus on understanding your concerns, your wishes, and the outcomes you're seeking. There's the inclusion of a statement of rights, which sets out what older people can expect. When older people are prevented from exercising their rights, we will engage with providers as necessary, work with them to comply with their obligations. Now, the law mandates a presumption that older people have the capacity to make their own decisions unless proven otherwise. And this ensures a clear focus for older people to exercise choice and control in the planning and delivery of aged care services. There's also now the recognition of registered supporters. The Act affirms older people have the right to make decisions that affect their own lives and to be supported to make decisions and have those decisions respected. Registered supporters are likely to be someone the older person trusts, such as a family member or friend, and older people can even appoint multiple registered supporters. Older people also now have access to a clearer complaints process with legislated timeframes, improved practices, a focus on restorative outcomes, and greater clarity in outcomes through complaint determination letters. This should help both older people and providers. We're still learning our new ways of working, but we're committed to refining our complaints process to improve it for us all. There are also some changes that impact both older people and providers, and that includes sort of family members and aged care workers. People can now raise their concerns as feedback if they don't wish to make a complaint. This can be information about a provider, a responsible person, or a worker not complying with the legislation or acting in a way that is not compatible with the statement of rights. So feedback can be shared in person, by phone, or in writing. Information can be provided anonymously or confidentially. The Commission will consider the information provided, make an assessment, and determine what further action is needed. There are lots of pathways now to provide us with information about issues that may be going on and older people might be experiencing. Under the new Act, information or a disclosure qualifies for whistleblower protections, where it is, and there's a few things here, shared with an eligible recipient, for example, the Commission staff, given verbally or in writing, whether made anonymously or not, and where the person has reasonable grounds to suspect that the information indicates that an entity may be failing to comply with the Aged Care Act. The new Act also gives people certain rights if they make disclosures that qualify for whistleblower protections. One of these rights includes being able to take action if you experience retaliation, punishment, or consequences because you made a disclosure. These are built in to encourage people to engage with us and with the sector, with their provider, about the issues they're experiencing. This means people can report concerns without fear they'll be punished or treated unfairly. This will help older people, families, and aged care workers. We'll take strong action against those responsible if we find people are victimised or face negative consequences for raising their concerns. Secondly, the new Act brings in changes for providers. They must be registered, and as part of their registration, they're required to comply with increased obligations and accountability measures. They must take all reasonable and proportionate steps to act in line with the Statement of Rights. They should focus on building their capacity to engage in direct complaint resolution and, as needed, support older people to access advocacy services. There's also now a strong focus on providers practicing open disclosure and restorative outcomes, creating a culture of learning and continuous improvement. And thirdly, from the Commission's perspective, the new legislation has created the role of the Independent Complaints Commissioner, who reports directly to the Minister and who you've just heard from today. Provides the Commission with new powers in response to serious non-compliance. This can include issuing notices, banning orders, compelling providers or workers to comply. As always, though, our approach is proportionate and based on the risk posed to the older person or people. Our powers can be used to place conditions on the registration of providers where they're non-compliant. This can include things like restricting them from operating in certain geographical areas, how many people they can deliver services to, or the types of services they deliver. Our role has been expanded to directly deal with complaints about the actions of aged care workers as well. The Commission now has increased reporting requirements about the complaints and feedback we receive. And also, as a result of some internal work across our regulatory operations areas, we've improved internal systems which give greater awareness of regulatory actions arisen from complaints. We have access to broader intelligence and real-time visibility of risks and issues as they happen. And the remaining intersections relate to education and empowerment. So these changes strengthen our ability to resolve complaints and reach meaningful outcomes and support genuine partnerships. By prioritising confidentiality and restorative engagement, we'll increasingly resolve concerns in a way that rebuilds trust, repairs relationships, supports continuous improvement, and delivers lasting outcomes. Now I'd like to move on and talk a bit about best practice complaint handling. The Commission's complaints operating model was designed to support best practice, something that's articulated by a range of complaint handling bodies and specifically guidance by the Commonwealth Ombudsman. Providers may wish to review their complaint systems against these key elements. Now, in doing so, we acknowledge the scale of provider operations will be relevant to how you give life to these practices, but the principles remain sound regardless. So, to go through the list, it should be user-centred, simple to access and easy to use. And that means putting the complainant at the centre of your process, and that making a complaint should be easy. Process should be well publicised and accessible. The system should support early resolution of complaints. This requires a blame-free, resolution-focused complaints culture. The best systems empower and support frontline staff to act and finalise complaints. The system should be integrated within the overall corporate structure. So resolving and learning from complaints often requires direct involvement with program, policy, governance areas. And this requires effective information sharing to ensure prompt internal complaint transfers and responses, while complaint managers need to know about changes to program delivery and program delivery areas need to receive complaint handling feedback as well. So the analysis of your complaint handling data, trends and insights is also important. This should be shared and reflected upon by your committees, advisory groups and executive. Complaints should be recorded in an electronic system capable of producing complaint insights. This allows for analysis of complaints data, interpreting the bigger picture, and what that's telling you is really important. Complaint handling should be supported by clear process guidance. So entities should develop a clear complaint handling policy which outlines the complaint handling channels, processes, responsibilities, quality assurance practices, and performance indicators. This helps staff implement your policy consistently and effectively. All staff should have the skills and support they need to deliver better practice. So your staff are your most valuable resource. They need to be supported, trained and empowered to discuss feedback and complaints processes in your service. Staff need to recognise feedback and complaints as a learning opportunity to improve your service. The final couple, the system should have robust quality assurance and review processes, and this may include a process for people to seek a review of how their complaint was handled, analysis of complainant satisfaction, and a regular review of your complaint handling processes. Finally, the system should be adequately resourced. So complaint handling systems must be properly staffed and resourced to enable organisational compliance. So all these things will set you up for success. And remember that the best systems aren't the ones which prepare for every possible scenario. They're the ones that have good recovery strategies for when things don't go to plan, as they inevitably will. So thank you for listening to me today. I'm now going to hand back to Liz, who'll be facilitating some questions to the representatives from OPAN and CODA who've joined us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, David. All right, we're really delighted that we have OPAN and CODA joining us, and I'd like to ask both Samantha and David if they'd share with us what good complaints resolution looks like for older people from their perspective. So Samantha, if I can perhaps start with you.
Thanks, Liz. I'd just like to start by acknowledging I'm on the lands of the Darug and Gungurra peoples up here in the Blue Mountains. As we've heard, older people are entitled to the rights specified in the Statement of Rights and obviously have a right to make a complaint about that breach of rights. And providers have an obligation to address complaints and need to ensure that their complaint system is in fact rights-based. And this includes things such as ensuring the person is informed in a way that they understand, having a complaints or feedback process so that the person can express their opinions about their services, and also making sure there's a feedback loop and closing that loop to ensure the older person knows that they've been heard and their complaint or their feedback has been listened to. The process also needs to enable the older person to communicate in their preferred language or use their preferred method of communication. So that includes access to interpreters or communication aids as required. What we've seen is complaints processes should include identifying what right is being breached, and it's really important to check in with the older person about what that right is, identifying the way the right is being breached, asking the older person what outcome they're looking for from the resolution process, and then checking if there's any intersecting rights they need to consider. So that's that kind of thing where I might want to listen to music, but someone else has a right not to hear that music. So seeing where there might be some overlap and that might be causing the issue. A rights-based approach also responds in a way that ensures that rights aren't breached while you're doing that response. So that means, you know, treating people with dignity and respect, ensuring your processes are culturally safe, having good communication, etc. It's also really important to ensure the resolution process addresses the right being breached and that you communicate this to the older person as well. Following on from that, obviously embedding the learnings and outcomes from that complaint across the service, educating staff, and providing that, again, that feedback to the older person about the outcome. And obviously also offering access to an independent aged care advocate. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you so much, Samantha. David, from your work at CODA, what does good complaints resolution look like for you?
Hello, everyone. I'd just like to acknowledge on the land of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. Just in addition to Sam's really excellent points on rights, just effective and transparent complaints handling is really essential for building trust and confidence in the aged care system. And that's just essential. And so we've got all got a stake in it. And older people have told us when the new Act was introduced that the complaint system was really important and a positive step. They're probably not quite so confident it's going to be effective. So it's really important that we get this right. Some key points that have already been reflected in the slide so far to some extent, but key aspects of a good complaints resolution system should be responsive, timely and efficient to address complaints and deliver better outcomes for older people. The transparency of the process is really important at both the systemic and organisational level. Older people are very sensitive to information being and the process being secretive, and so the most transparent that we can be is really important. Proactive identification and management of issues is important to prevent older people from reaching a state of risk. Using analytical tools and metrics to drive improvement is important, and for older people to see that within the organisation. And also the recruitment of complaints management staff at all levels with the right skills and attitude and aptitude to show empathy and to problem solve and to challenge the status quo is another important point.
Thanks so much, David. Samantha, older people can be hesitant to complain. They may have grown up with a different attitude about making complaints. We even sometimes call people born before 1945 the silent generation, where you didn't speak up. And we also know some First Nations elders are cautious about speaking up as they fear losing services, particularly in rural areas, or they may be concerned about getting someone in trouble. If this is the case for anyone listening today, what would you suggest they can do and how can OPAN help?
Thanks, Liz. Well, the simple one is contacting OPAN on 1800 700 600 and engaging an independent aged care advocate. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, OPAN does have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander advocates as well, so we can certainly match people up if needed, if people are looking for a specific support or advocate. OPAN has members in every state and territory. Advocates provide free, independent and confidential support, information and advocacy, and our advocates will work at the direction of the older person and aim to resolve the issue directly with the provider, but they can also raise and escalate the issue to the Commission if needed. Access to an independent aged care advocate is embedded in the Act, and aged care providers do have obligations under the Act to promote and facilitate access to independent aged care advocates. And this includes ensuring older people receive accessible information about how to contact an independent aged care advocate and providing information about the availability of OPAN advocates to assist with making a complaint to the Complaints Commissioner. I mean, obviously family members, registered supporters, carers and friends can be advocates if the older person has chosen them, but they're not actually considered an independent aged care advocate under the Act. But they are really important in playing, they have a really important role to play in noting issues and advocating for improvements in aged care. But what's really essential is it's not just about the older person, it's about the provider needing to make sure their environment is safe to make complaints. And I believe David will go into this more deeply. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Samantha. David, that's right. We'd love to hear from you about what providers can do to encourage and support older people to feel comfortable to provide feedback or make a complaint.
Thanks, Liz. I think it's important that both the system and the provider level, that there's investment in support and resources to enable older people to understand their rights, including the right to raise concerns and complain. Now, many people in aged care, older people, have had experiences where they feel there's a power imbalance between them and the organisational staff and the management, and some have had the fear of retribution if they make a complaint. So providers need to do their best to try to alleviate that power imbalance. They should positively promote a rights-based approach to complaints and regularly engage with older people on their experience of receiving aged care, but also their experience of making complaints. It should be clear that older people can make a complaint about their rights being ignored or not being upheld. The complaints process and the statement of rights in the Act are tied together. Providers must take all reasonable and proportionate steps to comply with the statement of rights. And that if they don't, this is grounds for complaints, and that needs to be made clear. It's also critical for clear information to be provided about the complaints process, including detailing the likely enforcement approach in specific circumstances, in egregious circumstances, so that older people in the community can understand how enforcement will work.
Thank you, David. It's, as you've highlighted, it's critical that providers engage direct to older people to find out what's working. So if you'd like to find out more from CODA or OPAN, those website details or telephone numbers are on the screen, and so please take a note if you haven't already done so. Thanks so much to all our speakers, and we now will move to Q&A, and we do have quite a number of questions that have come through. One of the first questions, and I'm going to ask Treasure to talk to this, is people often want to know what can I complain about to the Commission and what is outside of the scope. So do you want to have a go at addressing that one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Liz. The short answer is always, if you're not sure, ring us. But there are a few things that we can't really take complaints about. So any care service that's not funded by the government, we don't generally take complaints about. We also can't really take a complaint on the advice of the availability of care or services. We don't provide clinical or legal advice. We don't look at complaints between an employer and an employee, so those types of disputes. And we don't look at cause of death. That would be for the coroner. What we do look at, though, is whether the provider, worker or responsible person is meeting their obligations as defined by the Act. And we take a very broad view of that as well. And we also look at anything related to the Statement of Rights, which my colleagues have mentioned before. But as I said before, if you're not sure and you want to talk to us, then please just reach out and we will assist you as best we can. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much, Treasure. David, you spoke before about whistleblower protection. When people are ringing and want that protection, do they need to specifically request that?
Thanks for the question here. The short answer is no. I'll just go through a bit of background here to give it some context. So information qualifies for whistleblower protections when it's shared with an eligible recipient, so staff from the Commission or a registered provider, given verbally or in writing, and the person has reasonable grounds to suspect that the information indicates that an entity, so be a provider, a worker, a responsible person, may be failing to comply with the Act. So when those three requirements are met, this is a disclosure and qualifies for whistleblower protection. So on that basis, the Commission will be treating all complaints and concerning feedback as though it qualifies for whistleblower protection. So no, people do not need to specifically make this request when they contact us. We'll work with people and help them to make informed choices about how we manage the concerns they've shared with us. We'll explain the possible risks and benefits of making a complaint or choosing to lodge concerning feedback, choosing the feedback pathway instead of the complaint pathway. Disclosures shared with us are dealt with in consultation with the person making that disclosure. People can share information with us through these new pathways either anonymously, confidentially, or in an open manner as they wish. We have a policy, managing whistleblower disclosures policy, which explains how we receive, manage and use information shared with us that qualifies for whistleblower protections under the Act. And this policy is available on our website. I encourage people to have a look if they want to get into a bit more detail with that. Information and training is also available from the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing. And I believe links to these resources are available directly from the Commission's website. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much, David. And I should have said David P. Sorry. I've got a similar question that's come through, which is how, if you just want to give feedback and you don't want to make a complaint, how do you do that? Do you have to tell the person on the line, I'm not making a complaint, I'm giving feedback? Maybe David P., can you have a go at that one too?
I can. Certainly. Our role, our contact team, when people make contact with us, either through online complaint form, in writing, or over the phone, we'll contact the person to discuss their matter with them. Part of that will be initially a discussion about how they would like us to proceed with the information they're sharing. So we'll talk to them about the complaints process. We'll talk to them about the options for how they might be involved in that process. And like I said before, information can be shared with us in a way that is anonymous, where we don't record the person's details and don't share that information with the provider to ask some questions about what's been going on. Confidentially, where we hold that information but don't disclose it to the other party, or in an open manner where we engage quite directly with the provider about the concerns raised and the specific individuals involved. Each matter is different, which is why it's a really good opportunity for us to have that discussion with the individual, talk about their options and allow them to make an informed choice. So no, people don't need to nominate directly when they contact us. They can certainly outline their preferences, but we're happy to work with them on what their options are, pros and cons of each approach, and let them make an informed decision at the end of that.
Thanks, David. Now, in terms of people who want to complain about us as a commission, and we are just as open to hearing feedback and complaints about us as we ask the providers are, and we don't always get it right, and we know that. And so we do have a specific process, though, for people who want to complain about the commission or how we handled something. Treasure, do you want to give people that information?
Sure, Liz, and I'm like you, I'm really happy to get feedback so that we can continuously improve. Although I do hope that we get it right first time, so I hope that everyone who does bring a complaint to the Commission is satisfied with the processes. We do have a process that you can find online, which talks about how to give feedback from the Commission, or you can call us on the number I gave you before. It's important to know that if you do want feedback, if you do want to give feedback about the Commission, it is handled separately from your complaint, and you can actually ask for a review of your complaint as well, which we mentioned before. But certainly, if you have been through the complaints process, we will look to get feedback on the complaint and whether you're satisfied as part of our process. But if you're not, you're quite welcome to let us know, and there's a number of different pathways you can take. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Treasure. So, David P., some people are noticing some of the new processes under the Act, including providers. They're asking about, has there been a change in timeframes? Are they now able to get a copy of the outcome of the complaint? So can you talk to some of the changes that people are experiencing?
Sure, thanks. The Commission has introduced a new complaints process in response to the new legislation. So this was to ensure a rights-based, person-centred approach. Still early days, so please work with us, as some complaints are taking a little longer while our staff learn and embed these new processes. So at its core, our commitment is to ensure providers, responsible persons and aged care workers meet their obligations, which makes sure that everyone receiving aged care is treated with dignity and respect. To do this, we will seek evidence to support our assessment of the level of risk and to examine outcomes that are fair, practical and proportionate to the seriousness of the issues. So yes, as standard practice, providers will now receive a copy of the outcome letter in all matters. This is a bit different to requirements from the previous Act. Early feedback from some providers tells us that this is proving helpful, providing an opportunity for both learning and improvement. So providers should be seeing now, as matters are received under the new Act, we still have some legacy matters received prior to 1 November. We're dealing with that workload. But with new matters, we have an obligation now to provide a complaint determination to all relevant parties in the matter. So providers will be receiving a copy of that, outlining the information we considered and the steps we took to resolve that complaint and work with them. Other changes that providers will see is the statutory timeframes in which complaints will be resolved within, finalised within. There is a standard timeframe now within the legislation that talks about a complaint process finalising within 90 days. Now, some cases will take longer than 90 days, and we have processes where we will organise extensions to that, where there are complexities to the matter, where we might need to engage or seek specialist advice, clinical advice, legal advice, working with multiple parties to a complaint, or it might be an extremely complicated matter that involves many issues and a lot of back and forth with the provider. It might involve a complex resolution process. So we will work with providers in those cases and more than happy to receive feedback from providers about the new way we're working. And like I said before, we are still finding our feet. So providers, please bear with us, but also share your feedback, as we're hoping that a lot of the new process work we're doing is providing you with an opportunity for learning and improvement as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, David. We've got you sort of got to this question a little bit, but people have asked, what is the process of the Commission to act upon a complaint for the benefit of the resident? And I guess it does depend a bit on the complexity of the complaint. But David, do you want to give the kind of quick version of what we do with a complaint?
Sure. So when a complaint's received, we're wanting to have a look to see what obligations are not being met, or what allegations are brought to us, what information the complainant would like us to consider, what outcomes they're looking to seek as well. We assess the risk of each matter that we receive to determine what steps we need to take and how we would prioritise that as well. We continually talk about being a risk-based, proportionate regulator. So the steps we'll take will be proportionate to the risks raised in that matter, meaning that we would prioritise work that attracts the highest amount of risk to an individual. So we would assess that when the information comes in. We'll then engage with the parties. So first of all, talking to the complainant about the options, or the person contacting us, about the options open to them that they might wish to pursue, whether that's feedback or a complaint. We'll work with them on what that involves. We'll then look at understanding their concerns in the context of what provider obligations might be, or a worker's obligations, what rights are involved, and the overall sort of factual matrix of the case to see, well, look, what's relevant here for us to look at? What remedies are you seeking? We'll then work with the provider to say that we've received this complaint, whether it's an anonymous complaint, a confidential complaint, or one where we can share the information about the people involved, and talk to them to hear their side of the story. What's been going on from your perspective? What's happened? What should we know from your side of things? We do take that position of being independent and wanting to work with both parties to produce an outcome. So that involves understanding things from both parties' perspectives. Once we've got that information and worked out some options there, work with the parties to see what does a resolution look like from your side of things. For the complainant, the older person, obviously wanting to work with the older person, as Treasure mentioned, a bit of a saying, nothing about you without you. The older person is centred to what we do, so we want to engage with them about what's important to them in the complaint process, if that's the pathway we're choosing. Work with the parties on that resolution, how to achieve that. Talk to the provider about options open to them. And in most cases, we're able to achieve resolution through that sort of informal process. We may need to use some of our more formal powers from time to time, and that can require a provider to take certain action. And we might also involve our other regulatory partners if we feel that there's some egregious matters that require the more pointy end of the Commission's regulatory framework. So we would engage our partners there in terms of other action the provider might need to take. We share information across the Commission as well. So our work informs the work of our other areas, our audit, monitoring, compliance areas. They have access to our complaint information to inform their body of work, and vice versa as well. We have a look at the work that they've undertaken to help inform the risk that is posed to an individual in terms of the matter that's been brought to our attention. So a lot of gathering of information, working with the parties, but throughout all of that, keeping the older person core and centre to what we're doing. We can't lose sight of that, and achieving reasonable, proportionate outcomes through our complaint process.
Thank you so much, David. I've got another question maybe for Treasure. Someone's asking, how do you convince providers that complaints are evidence of continuous quality improvement?
Thank you, Liz. I don't know that I have to convince providers that they are. I think I'm going to suggest that most providers accept that a complaint is a gift and it's an opportunity to look at how you can make things better for that person or a range of people if it's something that perhaps involves a process or a particular aspect of the way that you deliver your services. Obviously, there are some powers that I do have in my role in the Act. So if through the complaint process we feel that we're not really getting that collaboration and cooperation that we're looking for, it may be that we use some of those powers to require a provider to take an action, and then we will follow through on that action. It's always better if the provider comes to the table with suggestions. But if that's not the case, then we'll do our best to provide suggestions, and we will expect they will be acted upon. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. This is another one, I think perhaps for David P. Do we ask people ringing to make complaints if they've first attempted to communicate with the provider about it?
We do ask that, Liz. Yes, it's a good question, because different complaint handling entities will take a different stance to that sort of a question. Some complaint handling bodies would require that an individual has lodged a formal complaint and exhausted those pathways before the complaint handling body, the external complaint handling body, would take it on. In our situation, we don't require that of anyone. We will ask people as to whether that's something they've done, and if so, what was the outcome. If they haven't, we might ask them, is this something you're open to doing? But we certainly don't require it. We understand the complexities that are involved in these situations, and the need sometimes for us to take that step on behalf of someone who is unable to do it themselves or has concerns about doing that. Again, these are all things we would weigh up, and we would probably refer back to the risk involved in the matter as well, suggesting that perhaps something that exposes or highlights a potential significant risk would not be something that we'd ask someone to go back and lodge a complaint about. And something that perhaps is a bit more run-of-the-mill, we might suggest that and encourage that. But there's no requirement that happen. We're happy to consider and act on complaints where that has or hasn't happened in the past. There's no requirement there.
Thank you. I might ask one final question, and I might ask Treasure this one. How would we handle a complaint where the provider considers that the client or their representative is vexatious or there's problematic behaviours? How do we work through those issues?
Yeah, it's a really complicated set of circumstances when this comes up, but it does come up. So first off, I want to recognise that it is sometimes an issue when it feels as though as a provider you're doing everything you can, but that the person won't accept what you're trying to offer or suggest, or they are repeat complainants. So that is, first off, I think that is where your commission is your friend, because we can be the honest broker sometimes in those types of complaints and really help provide a perspective that perhaps as an individual provider you may feel unable to provide, or you're just not getting cut through. So first off, you can absolutely talk to the commission about how we might work through that problem, together. And we might provide some advice on different ways that you could speak to that person, or how you might communicate with them effectively, or we may also. So I would encourage, first off, if you are having those kinds of challenges, that maybe you encourage the person to talk to the commission, and we can help work through that. A couple of things. It's a very complicated situation, which is hard to put into a very short space of time. But one thing I wouldn't recommend is cutting a person off. It feels as though sometimes you want to create some communication protocols around that person, and that very rarely goes well. So again, my suggestion would be to come to the commission and see if we can provide some guidance and advice. And it is going to come down to the individual and the circumstances that that particular individual is bringing to these concerns. But don't jump into just wanting to not let that person communicate, because even though you might find that they're quite persistent, they may actually have something really important to say.
Thanks so much, Treasure. Now, we're nearly at time, but I did want to give Samantha and David one more opportunity to add anything that they have thought about while we've been having the Q&A, other matters that they wanted to raise. So about good complaints handling. Samantha, do you want to add anything?
Great, thanks, Liz. Yeah, I was just thinking that it's really important that providers do engage with older people accessing their services, and that includes developing the complaints process with them, checking the complaints process is working for older people, and getting older people to review the process and provide feedback about its effectiveness and if it's actually achieving what it's been set out to achieve. The other one that really came to mind is in our advocacy cases, communication is constantly the top issue. So it's so important that providers communicate in a way that is accessible and understandable by the older person. And that's communicate when they get the complaint, communicate along the process, communicate the outcome and the reasons for the outcome. And then really important to just check in with the older person after the complaint is resolved and to make sure that any changes have been agreed are actually working, and that the complaint has been addressed. And I guess the last one, and this has been touched on a few times, it's really important to apologise. It's really essential and is a really sort of major part of that complaints process and getting it right. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much, Samantha. And David?
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate again how important complaints are for the system and implementing the new Aged Care Act and improving aged care services. And a complaint system really that works well, builds public confidence and trust. And the other point would be that we're sort of all learning together so that we cumulatively learn. So then that's providers, but it's also older people as well who are part of the system. We're learning about rights, and that's a continual ongoing process. So don't shy away from that. And I'm really glad that Commission's open to complaints about them, but the complaint should apply to the whole system, and that's really important. And we would say including assessment services as well. And we're also interested at CODA Australia in the development of mediation, conciliation and restorative outcomes, which I know is on the work plan of the Commission, and just really looking forward to the development of that in the resolving of complaints. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks so much. Well, thank you to our full panel today. Some really important topics covered and canvassed, and I hope you found it useful. And as I said, the recording will be on our website in the next couple of days. We'll send a link to everyone who has registered. I encourage you to visit our website to look at the range of information that's available on there. And just finally, a reminder about the feedback survey that's going to be on your screen immediately after this. Until next time, thanks so much for joining us today. Goodbye.